All right, before we start to talk about contour line, we need to first of all talk about how you hold your pencil. So for this class, at this moment, we're working on the tabletops. At some point, that's going to change, but either way, a lot of you are holding your pencil just like this, with your fingertips really close to the tip of your pencil. I'd rather that you shift it back. That way your fingertips are towards the middle to back end of the pencil. You'll actually be able to draw a little bit more. It'll free up your fingers for a greater range of motion, which is actually a thing. And you'll be able to kind of rotate that point. You don't really want to be holding it at the tip, particularly since we are going to be working upright, and at some point we'll be doing some painting, which is also upright on that easel. First step is just setup, making sure that you have your reference picture right alongside your drawing paper. You don't want to have it up above your drawing paper, and you don't want it to be like on your lap or someplace else. You need it right alongside, parallel to your surface. And your direction or orientation of your image should dictate the orientation of your paper. So if you have a vertical painting, you're going to be doing a vertical drawing. Now, it can be a little bit daunting going in there and starting your drawing. One thing I like to do is I like to figure out where the center of my reference picture is, and I do it both vertically and horizontally. I'm not actually drawing on there. I'm just taking a ruler and visually mapping it out so I can compare, because I want to see where that main figure of that child holding the lantern is placed. I want to also think of my paper as a frame, and I want to look at the reference picture, and I look at the rectangle there, and I try and match it up where things should go and how much space that main figure occupies. Now I'm using Vine charcoal here, and that's purely to show you what it looks like on the paper. If I were to use pencil, you would not see it. That's something that you actually need to aim for, drawing so that it is barely there. So drawing lightly in this case is very important. Now you should have picked a reference picture that you think you can handle. Now what we're really doing is breaking things down into simplified shapes. So that's what I'm doing when I look at this. I also do something called angular transfer, which is when I hold my pencil, or in this case my stick of Vine charcoal, up to an angle, and then I'll lock my arm at that angle and transfer it from the reference picture to my paper. That's something that you can only do while working upright. No matter which artwork you choose, you do have to size up. We're working on 14 by 17 inch paper, but the image that you have is probably not to that scale. So you're sizing everything larger, and you're trying to make it look proportional to your reference picture. One thing I do a lot of is I zoom in on an area with my eyes, and I look at things like the shapes and how they fit together, the distance between objects. I will also look for what's called negative space or negative shape. I will see the empty space as being a shape, which is something we're going to talk more and more about as the semester kind of unfurls. A painting like this has a lot of contrast in terms of light and dark, so that actually helps me to view that negative space a little bit better. So I'm looking at the space around the child's head, and I'm seeing that as a shape. That's also true of the flowers, so you could see the flowers as a positive space and the darkness around them as negative. Again, the key thing is really drawing lightly and get in those major shapes. You can worry about detail later. So focus on those major shapes you see. In this case, I'm working on like the circular form of a lantern, and there's quite a few lanterns. The more you look, the more you notice. And then eventually I'll go into the flowers, and I'll start to outline the flowers. When I'm outlining flowers, you can see them starting to take shape here. Oftentimes things like roses can become these kind of circular blobs. You can see them up close there. The daylilies are actually more complex. They're almost like you're doing starfish, but you have to pay attention. Sometimes when you view them from the side, they kind of look like an exploding trumpet. I always try to look for shapes that I can recognize. So I'll give it a name or something else I feel like I can draw, and then I'll render it with that in mind. Some of those flowers have some really interesting shapes. So the worst thing you could do is to make them all look the same, because they're actually not. They're turning different ways. Sometimes you see the back of the flower or the side view of the flower and not the flower directly open. For the roses, I went more with like a circular kind of funky shape, almost like a cotton ball. So you want to look for all the shapes that are taking place within your reference picture. Some of them may be geometric. Some of them may be more organic or freeform. The ones that I'm showing you here are kind of a mix of both, but it's predominantly freeform organic shapes. Pay attention to the size of objects and where one object meets another. Things like if there's two figures, you want to figure out which one is the taller of the two. Where do the heads align? Do the feet align? You want to ask yourself those questions because one might be on a different plane. There are also rules that you have to understand about things going back in space, that objects that are going off into the distance oftentimes appear smaller in size and skinnier. It's the same kind of rule as telephone poles. If you look down a street, those telephone poles will get successively tinier and tinier, even though if you know that if you were to walk alongside that street, they would be equal in size. So this process should take a long time. Again, you're seeing it here with Vine charcoal, but I want you to do it with pencil as light as you possibly can. Try and go correct with your proportions, which is how things compare to one another. And this is what it should look like. Now we are going to be going in there and we're going to be adding pen to suggest line type and texture and some value. Remember, if you get stuck, I am here to help you. You can also use the resources at your table, which means look around at your table, see if there's someone who is doing really well on the drawing part of this, and you can ask them for some help. The key thing really is to draw lightly, look for simple shapes, and kind of figure out how those shapes interact with one another. It's kind of like creating a giant jigsaw puzzle. And again, this is difficult, so I am here for you if you are stuck.